I was chatting with someone earlier on today before I came in to do the show, and they mentioned something to me that I've actually heard a number of times over the last kind of 17 years of my career. And they had said to me that they were trying to lose weight, and whoever or wherever they were going, or whoever was trying to help them with that, said to them, well, don't train, because if you train or exercise, you will gain muscle, and muscle weighs heavier than fat, so you won't lose any weight. So let's tackle that, because the reason I want to tackle it is because I've just heard this so many times. So firstly, if we just go with some basic information. So if you have a pound of muscle and you have a pound of body fat, they weigh exactly the same thing. So they both weigh a pound. So it's not that one weighs heavier than the other. They don't. Now, but there are differences. So they're two completely different tissues. They look different, they behave differently, they have different functions. So if we break this down a little bit, so, you know, for my PhD, one of the things that I did among many tests were we took muscle biopsies from the people who were on our training studies. And so let's just have a little chat about muscle. So muscle effectively kind of looks like steak, and it has many different functions. So you can increase the size of it and you can decrease the size of it. So yes, if you start training, particularly if you do resistance training, you can increase the size of your muscle. And then if you stop, it can decrease. And other things that cause muscle to decrease as well over time would be physical inactivity, a lot of sitting, a lot of lying behaviours, and ageing. So we can lose quite an amount of muscle, particularly after our 40s. You can certainly increase the size of it, you can decrease the size of it, and it's needed for movement, it's needed to produce strength and produce force, and it also it does many things, but it also is a very important endocrine organ. And what that means is that it produces a range of hormones, and these can either be health-promoting hormones or they can be health-damaging hormones, depending on the stimulus that the muscle receives. So, for example, if you move and you're active, you generally get the health-enhancing hormones, but if you're very sedentary, you can get the other type. Now, of course, they're impacted by many other things as well, but the moral of the story is that you can increase or decrease the size of your muscle, and it has very specific functions. Now, if we look then towards body fat, so body fat, there are different types. So subcutaneous body fat, for example, is found under your skin. So if you pinch the back of your upper arm, generally we're able to pinch a bit of body fat there, or if you know, on the tummy or the abdominal area, you'll generally be able to pinch some body fat there. So that's the subcutaneous stuff. It's the stuff that's directly under your skin. Now, we have other types of fats. We have fats that are in muscle. We call it intramuscular fats. We have fats in our blood. We have visceral fats, or fat that are around our abdominal internal organs. So you have lots of different types of fat. But when we do biopsies, muscle biopsies, sometimes you end up extracting some fat, and it looks completely different. It's kind of yellowish. It is kind of like, for want of a better comparison, like cottage cheese. So it's not very dense, and in terms of body fat, you can also increase and decrease the size of it as well. So muscle tends to be much more like it'll if you have a high amount of muscle mass, it'll give you that toned look, whereas if you have a high amount of the subcutaneous fat tissue, it won't look terribly toned. But for both tissues, you can increase or decrease the size of them. One doesn't weigh heavier than the other. As I said, if you have a pound of muscle or a pound of fat, they'll weigh the same. But the difference is that from a toning perspective, I suppose what we would notice is that the more muscle you have, the more toned you would look. Now, body fat has its own functions as well. So it'll do things like it will give us insulation. So it will help us to stay warm. It will store energy for us, which we need. So it'll store energy that we can use when we need it at a later date. But it's also a very important endocrine organ too. So it also produces a load of hormones. And again, these can be health enhancing or they can be detrimental to health. And again, it depends on the stimulus that you give it. So it can be very much impacted by how active you are, by the foods you eat, and all sorts of stuff like that. So to bust my first myth, one doesn't weigh heavier than the other. And this is leading into my second myth. So people would say to me, oh, I've heard, if I start exercising, I'll develop muscle, but then if I stop, my muscle will all turn into fat. Okay, so I've just explained that muscle and fat are two completely different tissues. They look completely different. They behave completely different. You can increase or decrease the size of each, but you absolutely cannot convert one into the other. So you cannot convert muscle into fat. You cannot convert fat into muscle. It is physiologically impossible. So they are two complete myths, and hopefully this little nugget of information has been able to help you navigate those.